Okay, good. Okay. Sajid and I affirm our sole contention is saving the environment. Subpoint A is lawsuits. Gross Secretary Condition writes in 2012, foreign countries currently cannot sue the U.S. over climate change-related issues. However, joining UNCLOS would create the possibility of enforceable environmental lawsuits over marine pollution. In fact, Groves reports that scores of island nations are ready to sue us if the U.S. accedes to the convention. These lawsuits would cause sweeping environmental reforms. As Groves concludes, if UNCLOS tribunals would force the U.S. to adopt a cap on their carbon emissions. Because UNCLOS is a self-executing treaty, UNCLOS decisions have the full force of U.S. law. McSweeney of the Carbon Brief furthers in 2016, capping emissions could save 300,000 people. Even if lawsuits are not successful, Vanda of the Cato Institute writes in 2012, the mere threat of lawsuits could catalyze similar environmental regulations. That's especially important now, as Swanstone of Vox reports in 2018, Trump already has a plan in place to gut the EPA, whose regulations save more than 230,000 people every year. Subpoint B is mining rare earth minerals. According to Moore in 2004, the United States has identified 5 mining sites for rare earth minerals or REMs and what will be considered American ocean tracts if the U.S. joins UNCLOS. Moreover, Smith and Scientific American writes in 2016, extracting these minerals is, quote, technologically and financially feasible because the higher concentration of REMs in the ocean means it is much more cost-effective than mining REMs on the land. There is just one obstacle remaining. Think Progress reports in 2012 that as UNCLOS governs ocean resources and tracts, American companies are unwilling to pursue ocean extraction if the U.S. is not a member of the treaty, fearing other countries will not recognize American leases of the ocean. In fact, big mining companies such as Lockheed Martin have explicitly stated they will not mine without UNCLOS accession. Providing companies with the legal certainty to tap this supply of REMs is of critical importance. As ENS writes in 2018, rare earth minerals are irreplaceable components of green technology, and Renewable furthers in 2015, any potential substitute would be inefficient and thus unprofitable. Jones of Yale concludes in 2013, a global shortage of REMs is hindering the growth of renewable energy, leading MIT to ultimately conclude production will be impossible come 2040. Abraham of the New York Times explained in 2015, even just fears of a potential REM shortage have caused many countries to abandon green technology. Even absent the shortage, American mining is still critical to advance green technology. Since 95% of REM supplies originate in China, Leifa Sonarasan of the National Institute for Advanced Studies writes in 2014, countries are unwilling to deploy green energy grids for fear of China holding their electricity hostage. By providing another REM supplier in the market, joining UNCLOS allows for the expansion of green energy across the world. Without American mining, the future of humanity is bleak. The ISA finds all current projects in UNCLOS nations are still in the exploratory stage, meaning joining UNCLOS and giving companies access to our 5 confirmed mining sites is the best chance to alleviate the global REM shortage and continue green tech progress. Kuo of the Lowy Institute furthers in 2018, Japan's recent discovery of REMs is far too deep to extract. Absent green technology, Harry Cockburrow of the Independent Quantifiers in 2016, continued reliance on fossil fuels to increase global temperatures by 10 degrees Celsius, pushing billions into extreme poverty and more than tripling the frequency of resource wars through changing weather patterns and decimating crop yields. Strategic Studies professor Robert Sharpless concludes in 2014, climate change is the single most significant threat to humanity. Even the immediate effects of air pollution are devastating. As Jacobson of Stanford writes in 2017, by replacing fossil fuels with minimizing emissions, green technology would save 7 billion people every single year. As such, we would find.
I see Yale as substitutes aren't proper.
And also just quickly, what's the date on MIT?
2016.
Actually, yeah, can I see MIT?
Yeah, sure. Here's MIT.
Thanks.
Starting.
Awesome. Brilliant.
Alright. We negate, and our first contention is destabilizing the South China Sea. China's actions in the South China Sea are rooted in their fears of what they perceive as aggression by the U.S. Yingli 18 of the RSIS writes that Chinese leaders consider the U.S. a destabilizing force in the region, thus becoming the biggest driving force behind regional militarization. However, the U.S. has backed off the global stage, lessening China's fears. Yingli furthers that many Southeast Asian countries have begun to question the U.S.'s commitment to the region, and Beijing has skillfully capitalized on Washington's negative publicity to portray itself as the more constructive power in the region. In the absence of pressure from the U.S., China has made a number of moves towards peace. The South China Morning Post reports in 2018 that foreign ministers from China and Vietnam have vowed to address disputes peacefully, and ABS News reports in 2018 that the Philippines and China have also reaffirmed their commitment to peaceful resolution. However, affirming the law this year would signal a greater U.S. presence in the international stage. Cronin 18 writes in The Diplomat that adopting UNCLOS would bolster American leadership at a time when many question its reliability and staying power. To Chinese leaders, this would be seen as a U.S. attempt to undermine their control by turning other states against them, raising tensions in the region. Chan 16 at the Foreign Policy Research Institute explains that Chinese leaders see fears of encirclement as a way to rally public sentiment and maintain the social stability needed to ensure the longevity of communist rule. Indeed, that public anger generated by fears of the U.S. can itself become a pressuring force towards violence. Holmes 18 of the National Interest writes that it's doubtful that China can comply with UNCLOS provisions even if the leadership wished to, because leaders have regaled the populace with how they will use seagoing forces to right wrongs against the state. They must now follow through on perceived threats to their sovereignty. This escalating cycle of fears and backlash has already been shown to be dangerous. For example, Mearsheimer 14 writes in Foreign Affairs that in Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the U.S. and its European allies share most of the responsibility for the crisis. The taproot of trouble was NATO enlargement, the central element of a larger strategy to move Ukraine out of Russia's orbit and integrate it into the West. For Russian leaders who adamantly opposed NATO enlargement, they made it clear that they would not stand by while their strategically important neighbor turned into a Western bastion. China's response to fears of U.S. encroachment would be similar to Russia's invasion of Crimea, where they would pick off smaller Southeast Asian nations to so control. Tham 18 writes in The Diplomat that when regional geopolitics shift to one more antagonistic to Beijing's interests, there would be nothing stopping China from teaching its neighbors a lesson, like how it taught Vietnam a painful lesson during the 1979 Third Indochina War. In this instance, despite the conflict lasting just 6 weeks, 50,000 people died. Our second contention is Arctic drilling. Grade 13 at the Coast Guard explains that there are currently overlapping claims in the Arctic, and that UNCLOS provides the legal basis necessary for resolving claims and establishing the stability necessary to support development. Without UNCLOS, no U.S. company will make the investments required to recover these resources without the legal certainty the convention provides. Accession to the law of the sea would be good news for oil companies, as Gardner 12 of the American Security Project writes that the Arctic Alaska province is estimated to hold 30 billion barrels of oil. Through acquiring resource rights, the U.S. would substantially increase its oil production in the long term. But while oil companies would cheer on the treaty, the rest of the world wouldn't. More drilling inevitably leads to more emissions, which comes at a high cost. Bigger health bills, more insurance against extreme weather, lost earnings from storms and droughts, and the destruction of industries like agriculture and tourism. Indeed, Donaghy 16 at Greenpeace estimates that offshore drilling would result in up to $179 billion of these types of costs to society. Thus, we negate.
Do we want front?
Yes.
Oh, no.
Okay. So everyone ready? So you make this argument in your first contention that if the U.S. joins UNCLOS, China will feel encircled.
Yes.
So why is UNCLOS the only mechanism by which China will feel encircled by the West?
Well, we say that the reason that UNCLOS is so important is because right now the U.S. is falling off the global stage, and as one of the most important multilateral institutions in the world, UNCLOS is crucial for alliance building, and when we restore, but more importantly, restore credibility to our allies, which gives them the fear of
But aren't we literally encircling China with our ships anyway?
Not really. So the argument that we are making is that what's going on right now, the ships that we're sailing across each other are kind of just military theater, but both sides know that we would never use them in an offensive manner, and the important thing is that China feels safe.
So can you explain, so what happens when you affirm? What happens in the South China Sea?
Yeah, so what we say is that you strengthen the U.S.'s commitment to our allies, you restore credibility, coalitions build.
Why is that strengthening enough for China to start invading Laos?
Well, because we say that they see it as they see it as us, A, trying to build coalitions, but B, actually in the long term, succeeding in building coalitions, which are meant to rein them in. which
So if
leads
the
them to
US
lash
was to
out
make,
and
like,
protect themselves.
a trade
Like this
with
is
Vietnam,
so
which China
Ethan,
invaded
so
Vietnam.
Ethan. Well, no, because this is specifically defense commitment. We give you the example of Russia and Ukraine. When NATO and the US tried to bring Ukraine into its orbit, Putin feared for his
Wait, so
security, so he lashed out.
The US has like.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So your argument about REMS is that
Yeah.
when REMS become more cost effective than like oil, then that's when the switch to green tech will happen.
No, we're just saying that come 2040, it's going to be nigh impossible to build green technology because you literally don't have the component metals to do so.
Okay, but if we were able to get REMS from other sources, then you wouldn't really have
Sure, but those sources are running out. That's what
Well,
everyone's
but
thinking. That's why we need to
here's the
fix
problem. So where does the US, what's the area called that the US is going to drill in?
Like the ECS?
No, no. So the specific place is called the CCZ. That's just the area where the nodules are really dense, like you tell us in case. But can you tell me how many countries the ISA has issued permits to drill or to mine in the CCZ?
Well, no one's drilling.
Well, mining.
They're trying to explore, but the US is the only one that actually has confirmed sites.
That's not true. This ISA has issued 12 permits in that
Sure,
area.
but those are exploratory permits, not actual mining permits. But I want
Wait.
one more question.
It's the same thing.
I want one more question.
What's the difference?
Because one is exploring and one is like, you know they can mine them. Can I ask you
No,
one more
like
question?
Canada setting up mines.
So,
sure.
The US has like tens of thousands of soldiers in like South Korea, right? In Japan, we have
Sure.
defense
Look,
treaties.
the
Why
thesis-
isn't China invading them?
The thesis of our case is that as a whole, U.S. credibility and U.S. presence is declining. In the past couple of years, for example, we've decreased the amount of military drills
Sure, but
we've
they're
done
still
with the
there.
country. Well, hold on. But the point is that the trend is going down. We were conducting less military drills with, for example, the Philippines that we're used to. When you affirm, you reverse that trend and you put the fire under China's feet, which leads them to have to protect themselves and lash out. So that's time.
We'll keep doing. Take it from the side.
That's what you guys. Is everybody ready?
Yeah.
Starting on our China argument, we think climate change is always going to outweigh the impacts of this contention. We do the weighing for you in case. Sharp explains this is the greatest threat to humanity. It affects 3.5 billion people for centuries. Their argument affects a few people for not that long. The WHO finds that just people that die from air pollution from these emissions kill 7 million people every single year. That's 140 times the number that they give you in case every single year. Climate change is going to dramatically outweigh this contention. But second of all, we don't think, like, China sees these countries as part of the American circle regardless, because we have defense treaties with all these countries. We have a defense treaty with, like, Thailand, we have, like, 200,000 troops in South Korea. This is absurd. But thirdly, we think, if anything, UNCLOS would help with this perception, because it restricts with some of the things our military can do, like intelligence gathering. Now go to Arctic drilling, because their first convention doesn't link to climate change, so it isn't going to matter in the round. But Arctic drilling does. So, a lot of responses. First, nobody's going to drill in the Arctic as long as there's oil in the Gulf, because the Gulf is always going to be cheaper because they don't have the same environmental concerns. Insofar as the Gulf has literally billions of barrels of untapped oil, they're not going to the Arctic. Second of all, Shell explains that it costs $100 a barrel to extract oil from the Arctic, which means oil prices need to be higher than that consistently in order to justify an investment in an Arctic oil rig. But OPEC finds they won't reach that level until 2040. They're probably going to read you evidence that either says it'll reach there sooner, or that technology makes this cheaper. But the critical analysis says that these countries, that these prices need to remain stable for decades in order to make sure that this investment will pay off. The Wall Street Journal finds that over the past decade, oil prices have fluctuated from $110 to $30 a barrel, which means that there is no way that these countries will be assured of that certainty. Thirdly, NPR explains that you need 6 icebreakers to be able to drill in the Arctic because you need to be able to cut through the ice and make sure that floating ice doesn't hit your rigs, which the US only has 1, so we can't drill in the Arctic. Fourthly, Tabucci of the New York Times explains that there's still political uncertainty even if there isn't legal uncertainty, because different administrations have different rules on Arctic drilling in terms of whether or not they allow it. So for example, Obama had strict regulations on drilling and Trump took most of those away. Nobody's going to put an investment in the Arctic if they think that in the next 4 or 8 years that investment might get taken away, that investment might get undermined by administration rules. Fifthly, Carrington of the Guardian explains that investors are hesitant to pursue any Arctic drilling project, even on land, because the environment makes it so unstable. There is no way to be sure that the hundreds of millions of dollars you sink into Arctic infrastructure will be there for decades and will be returning profits for decades. Companies need to be assured not only of their investor support now, but over the next few decades because it's a long-term project. Sixth, the Center for American Progress explains that in Alaska, which, like in the Arctic Circle, where we have similar environmental conditions, where we have 100% legal certainty that's on American soil, we have only drilled 2% of the drillable land, which obviously indicates we are not willing to drill in the Arctic. There's no way we'd be willing to drill like 400 miles offshore. In contrast, we've drilled 222 times that amount in the Gulf. 7. Turner of Offshore explains that indigenous people will sue these companies to prevent them from drilling. This happened in 2016, which is why Shell had to pull out. All right, I have extra time, so back up to the China contention. We think that even if the U.S. joins UNCLOS, China will never perceive these countries as a threat because these countries are economically dependent on China according to the Institute for International Economics, which means that China always has leverage over these countries, which is why they're able to bully Vietnam and the Philippines. By the way, their evidence about how there's talks with Vietnam and the Philippines are literally examples of Chinese coercion, because China prevented the Philippines and Vietnam from doing things in their waters in the South China Sea, which is why Vietnam and the Philippines were forced to go to China and basically ask permission to do fishing in their own waters. The idea that the South China Sea is peaceful right now is quite absurd. We see China doing interceptions of our ships. We see them literally intercepting aircraft within 50 feet of our fighter jets, going 400 miles an hour. It's very dangerous. It's not a stable situation right now.
We'll take break. We have a few seconds. Yeah, right. All right, is everyone ready? Starting on our China contention. Start on China. My opponents say first look to climate change. We say climate change is a bad issue, but they never provide you the scope of solvency. We agree climate change is a big deal, but they never tell you how many lives their renewables rollout saves. They never say how many more renewables we get from rare earth metals, and they never say how many more of these renewable energy we need to save these many lives. We would say our impact is actually far more direct, because the Vietnam example we give at the bottom of the convention says that even though the conflict there lasted for just 6 weeks, 50,000 people died. On the ground, the effects of this war are much more immediate. Then they say that doesn't matter because, then they say it doesn't matter because the U.S. has defense treaties. The U.S. has had defense treaties and a military presence for 60 years, but they drop our Yinghui evidence from this year, which claims that the U.S. has recently backed off from the global stage and international agreements. This has created a power vacuum in the South China Sea that has allowed China to go in and made them less fearful. Comparatively, when China sees that even though there's always a military presence, but the U.S. is comparatively less in the region, this makes them feel more secure. It's the perception that really matters. Then they say that they make a literal response that really climbs to our thing. They say China's diplomacy is bad because it's coercive. First, it's actually not coercive because these nations nations are mutually agreeing to defense treaties. That's what the card says. It says that both the Philippines and China are agreeing to work these things out. But two, even if there is some coercion, there will always be some level of coercion when you're dealing with big powers like China. But it is far, far, far from any impact that concerns war. The comparative is very simple. Either you have some level of coercive diplomacy, or China becomes a lot more angrier and a lot more militaristic. Then they say you increase U.S. intelligence. Turn this argument against them. An increase in U.S. intelligence signals to China that we are amping up the war, which increases their aggression in turn. Then they say from Lee that China has leverage and they can use that. Two things. First off, China already uses leverage over these nations right now, with like the Philippines and Vietnam. If these nations drift towards the U.S. because the U.S. signals that they're on their side, it shows China that economic leverage by itself is not working and that militarism has to be employed to be effective. But second, they drop our Chang and Holmes evidence, which is really important, which says that when you affirm the law of the sea, it starts a violent cycle of nationalism and amps up. And it means that Chinese people put pressure on Chinese leaders to act out much more aggressively against the U.S. And they drop a Mearsheimer evidence that indicates that the last time this happened in Russia, it led to an invasion of Crimea, not just economic pressure. Go to their case on lawsuits. A couple of responses. First, Rousseau explained that the law of the sea is an ocean treaty, and has literally no jurisdiction over the land or climate. There is no basis for a suit. But two, Rousseau explained that even if there was basis, the UNCLOS only makes the U.S. comply with its own laws, not with laws that it hasn't signed. Because the U.S. has no law that bans coal plants and fossil fuel plants, there's nothing that we can do that would actually make this illegal. But third, this is proven by the simple fact that many major polluters like Russia, China, the UK, India are all in the law of the sea and have never been sued by the law of the sea and have never actually had to shut down these plants. It just simply won't happen. Now, let's go to REMS. First, an overall response. We control the internal link into this debate because, as Butler explains, China has the largest source of REMS they can see to this, which means that China will probably cut off REMS in the event of a conflict. In fact, they did this. In 2010, they cut off an entire source of REMS to Japan because of a trade dispute, which increased the price of REMS. We control the link into that. Now, let's go to where they say that UNCLOS gives us access to mining for REMS. This is a very bad thing on face. Moss explains that tens of thousands of creatures live in the deep sea vents that will be destroyed if you mine for rare earth metals on the deep sea. He explains this is called the extinction of species like phytoplankton. And that's bad because Moss explains that they hold 90% of the methane, and that killing these species off means that thousands of tons of methane leave the atmosphere, and he calls it a doomsday climate event. Way this over there is a likelihood. You know this will guarantee to happen. You don't know if it goes to renewable energy. Then, they say that from Yale that's unprofitable about anything else. This is old evidence from 2013. Before Richardson in 2018 who explains that there was literally no need to use rare earth metals for renewable energy. Most companies don't even do that. And Teste explains you can go 100% green without rare earth metals. And Mitch Yaka, most important card, says that the decrease in prices recently for renewable energy has not been related to rare earth metals, but to innovation. Then, they say that China has a big supply. Turner explains China will never run out of their supply, meaning there's never going to be a need to mine for new rare earth metals because we already have the supply needed for demand. Then, finally, they never give you a piece of evidence that says it actually goes to renewable energy. Instead, it'll go to two other places. A is to the military. Greer explains that because the U.S. military wants to wean off supply from China, it'll go there, which is really bad because when the U.S. military weans off supply from China, it signals to China that they are amping up for invasion because China thinks that because they're reducing reliance means that the U.S. is amping up for invasion. B, it'll go to oil. Hessman explains that over half of all rare earth metals are used in oil refining, which is really bad because the more oil refining you have, the lower the price is. In fact, Leffery finds that there's an empirical relationship between more rare earth metals and a decreased price for oil, which means that you'll see a lower cost of oil and a harder adoption of renewable energy in the future. Thank you.
Alright, please run 30 seconds, we'll run some more. Alright, that was 110, so we've used 140. Alright, cool. So let's talk about China. What about the US joining UNCLOS inflames nationalism?
Because it sends a signal that the U.S. is messing in China's business in the South China Sea.
Why is
that's what
UNCLOS
the
China's
US
business?
Sorry?
Why is UNCLOS China's business?
Because the law of the sea governs what happens in the sea. It signals that the U.S. is trying to take a
So
greater
if
presence
the
in
U.S.
the
does
sea
anything on the
oceans.
sea, China gets angry?
No, when the U.S. signs the biggest governing treaty that determines what happens in the oceans, it signals to countries in the South China Sea that now we're going to fight for international law against China harder,
But
and B,
literally
it
every
signals to
country
China
has
that we're
signed
going
this
to. Sorry?
Literally every country has signed this treaty. China hasn't gotten angry at them.
Sure, but no country would push like the U.S. against China. Look, you just don't respond to the evidence that you read in case from Cronin and from Yingli
No, I
that
understand your
indicates
evidence.
that U.S.
I'm questioning
aggression,
your
because of UNCLOS, increases Chinese militarization. Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
So let's talk about a different side of China. Rare earth minerals, right?
Sure, that's it.
So y'all claim that we're not going to have enough rare earth minerals to facilitate a shift to renewable energy, right?
Yeah, we'll concede that we have enough rare earth minerals.
From China, right?
Not all of it's from China, some of it's from China.
But like 90% is from China, right?
Yes.
Okay. So you're conceding your second contention.
No, we are not.
Okay, so if we have enough rare earth minerals,
We have enough rare earth minerals.
so why would it go towards renewable energy?
Because there's a free market, like green energy companies buy the REMs.
Sure. So clean energy companies buy the RMs. Is there demand for clean energy companies to buy the RMs? Like, do they need them?
It's more efficient and more cost effective. So yes,
It's not. The Richard Evans is very explicit in saying that
Yes,
certain
no, I
companies
understand
don't
that.
use rare earth metals.
It says, it says that certain companies don't use rare earth minerals, but in order to build an entire electrical grid around green energy, you need stuff that is high performing and isn't going to like break down because you're using the raw material. The way that they make these substitutes is they basically take a bunch of rocks and smash them together and hope that they'll find the exact chemical properties found in rare earth minerals. Rare earth minerals are critical to make green technology.
No, we can have a massive. The Teskey evidence is very explicit. He does an analysis of what we have right now, and he says we can go 100% green without needing to mine the deep sea bed. There's just no demand for it.
I understand that they can, but we won't. There is no way that the countries are going to be willing to put their electric grid on the line for a bunch of rocks that got smashed together and don't have the right chemical properties.
Like we can, like we will. Like I can go to Bronx Science today. I will go to Bronx Science today.
But there's different things.
Well, but if a country has to choose between an available source of rare earth metals from China, say, or an entirely new source, I mean,
Wait,
it's
what's
just
the
not a
difference
good deal.
between a new source of rare earth? What?
My point is just that there is no demand for it to go to renewable energy. Like there's no need for it.
I mean, there is. That's why a bunch of it goes to renewable energy. The reason why more of it isn't going to renewable energy is because renewable energy isn't as popular right now. Like, most of the world is not powered by renewable energy.
No, it is being expanded. The Michiyaki evidence
Yeah,
I
yeah.
believe indicates that it is expanding and the prices are going down. It's just not going down because of rare earth metals. Which means that even if you negate, I'll just make this very clear, even if the judges negate, you can still see an expansion of renewable energy.
No, you can't, because countries are not going to put their electrical grids online for experimental technologies that literally do not work as well.
Okay.
We'll take a few more to think about.
Okay.
Alright,
It's going to be climate change, China, REMS. I'll sign those.
Wait, sorry, who's just like an
His,
overview?
yeah,
Thanks,
his climate
Mark.
change stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, is everyone ready? Start on weighing. Climate change comes first. The WHO tells you there are 7 million people that die a year from the air pollution effects of climate change. Their only response to this is that we have no scope of solvency. We are literally going to access 10 degrees Celsius of warming because absent green technology, we are burning fossil fuels to the end of time, which will increase the temperature of the world by 10 degrees. That is on magnitude a significantly bigger impact. On scope, it's bigger because it affects the entire world, and it turns case because it will cause resource conflicts, it will cause China to invade these neighboring countries. But on their China argument, they lose it because the economic dependence argument. There is no encirclements because China will not fear these countries. They say China will use leverage. The shift will show that these countries are going closer to the United States. China doesn't care how close we are to the US because they know they can economically bully them without a threat. He says China will use nationalism. This is really our argument. China becomes more nationalistic, they'll use economic bullying against these countries. It's the equivalent of the US being scared by Puerto Rico or Mexico. There's no economic encirclement. On our case, we're going for our REMS argument. They agree to the legal certainty part that if we join UNCLOS, we will mine the ocean. He says China will cut off REMS. That is literally arson and Rawson evidence. Countries are scared to deploy green energy because they're scared that China's going to cut off their electricity, meaning if we introduce another supplier to the market, they adopt green technology. Then he says that the Department's microorganisms. According to The Guardian, there's new greener technology, so this doesn't happen. Then he says that there's no need for REMS making green technology. There are theoretically alternatives, but the comparatives that Yale is waiting for and saying these alternatives are too inefficient, thus not cost efficient for companies to use them. Then he did these grants would go to the military. He misunderstands how the free market works. The free market is that various companies will mine these REMs and sell them to various companies, and green technology companies will get some of the metals. Then he says that REMs go to oil. But the Guardian explains that only the oil competes with green energy, and only 5% of the market, because oil is used for things like car fuel, whereas green energy is used for electricity. The clockwork evidence indicates that we don't have more and more green technology. The Earth is going to get hotter by 10 degrees. Irrespective of the shortage, we still link the green technology in two ways. First, some Ross evidence earlier talked about saying countries are scared to deploy green energy because they're scared China's going to take away their electricity grids. And second is Abraham that says, because conceded, there's a fear of shortages of REMs, which is why countries are not deploying green energy. Meaning, even if we don't win the shortage, we still win that there are countries that are going to deploy more green energy if the U.S. enters the green, or if the U.S. enters the REM market.
We see the Guardian that the new mining won't kill organisms.
Gotcha.
Sorry, fun. Can we just get a little more fun?
Yeah, sure. I'll just close that. No paragraph about it, but
Thanks. Zoom out.
Okay,
Ethan. Alright, that's it.
okay.
What's that? The floor is starting on.
I'm going to start on the environment, like overview,
Okay.
then our China.
All right.
They say that the environment is the most important issue in the round, but remember, they just don't tell you how many more people they save. They don't tell you how much more green technology. Our China story is incredibly clear. Let's get into that. What we say is that right now, the US is backing off of the global stage, and as a result, tensions are decreasing in the South China Sea. However, when you affirm, you signal to China that we are ramping up our aggression because we are trying to recommit to our allies and encircle them. The reason why that is so important is because that leads them to defending their homeland and lashing out. Specifically, they invade Vietnam and 50,000 people died. This is exactly what happened when we try to bring Ukraine into our orbit in NATO. Putin lashed out. They never respond to this. Their only response is that China will use economic coercion. But that is exactly what is happening right now. But that does not matter. The reason that countries were flipping over to China is not because of economic coercion, but listen to rather what they were saying. Duterte says is that I am flipping because the US is an unreliable ally. Therefore, that is the only thing that matters. The only way that you restore US credibility like it was during the Cold War, when everyone was on our side, is when our credibility is at the highest. That is only what happens when you affirm. The other place you can vote for us is on their argument about mining. Remember Daniel's response that you don't need REMs in order to make the switch to green tech. They say we do. Prefer our warranting, which is that from Tiaka, which is that the decrease in price in renewables was not because of REMs, but was because of recyclables. This is the only analysis that is given to you. The reason why that is so important is because you don't need REMs for green tech. However, the uniquely bad thing that does happen is when you affirm is that you engage in deep sea mining. Deep sea mining is really bad for the environment because it destroys the habitat of these organisms and releases harmful sediment. Their only response is there's some better mining technology, but it never says that it prevents these organisms from dying. Prefer the physics.org, which says that even a small disturbance will literally lead to the extinction of many species in the best case scenario. You prefer this turn because there's a 100% probability that you kill these organisms, which remember, prevent 90% of methane from reaching the surface, which is the most potent greenhouse gas in the world, which is why we are very proud to negate.
Okay. You guys ready for ground costs? Yeah. So is the U.S. scared of being encircled by countries in like Latin America or Canada?
Well, so the reason that China is uniquely is scared of encirclement is because of something called just the century of humiliation, which was this 100-year period when imperialist powers such as Japan and England came in and divided up their land.
Sure,
and do you know where
China is no longer scared of countries like Vietnam and Laos.
That's not true. They're scared of coalitions. And the reason that they're scared, specifically in the South China Sea, is because that is the place where they entered China. So what actually kids learn from the age of 2 to 18 in China is about the century of humiliation. And their number one goal is to make sure that never happens again.
China was never colonized by like Vietnam, right? Because China has no reason to scare these small South Asian countries.
They were colonized by imperialist and sort of big powers, which is what they fear the U.S. By Japan and the UK. That was the Opium Wars. So they fear that when the U.S. re-enters the region by signing the law of the sea, it signals in many different ways that the U.S. is gearing up to dominate China. One of them is through encirclement, but we give you other warrants too. The other one is the intelligence warrant you give yourselves, and the other one is the fact that we're going to wean off rare earth metals.
In terms of intelligence, you said intelligence is bad. Now, our restricts our intelligence. So,
that was. I mean, you didn't even say right.
I mean, sure, but like the point is, it's just the simple fact that our evidence indicates that a resurgence of, like, the unique evidence is that the root cause of Chinese aggression is a fear of the U.S. being a solid force in the region, and because UNCLOS reinvigorates U.S. presence in the region, it leads to more Chinese aggression.
Why doesn't U.S. presence?
Well,
you just said like our nations feel like we're more of a player on the world stage.
So first, again, this is a late response, but more importantly, our Cronin evidence is incredibly explicit in saying that the law of the sea is one of the most important international institutions in the world. Therefore, when we sign on to it, our allies are recommitted to us, which builds coalitions.
Okay, so let's say
makes them aggressive. Can I move on?
Wait,
move on. Yeah, I just want to not give off guidance. So I'm going to ask about rare earth metals.
Okay.
Right. So y'all's claim is that no country is, at all doing anything about renewable energy because they don't fear they have solid supply, right? Why is the price of renewable energy going down? Why is it being adopted more?
I don't think that matters for our case.
I mean, yeah,
because if the price is going down and more people are using it, then it is being adopted.
We're saying that other countries won't adopt it regardless of the price unless they can wean themselves off of Chinese dependency on rare earth metals.
Well, so we're saying that they already can because rare earth metals just simply
don't need them for the technology.
But
the actual scientific study that we cite, which is by the way the only scientific study in the round talking about this, literally says.
This is the Yale study.
Yes, it literally says it's less efficient and doesn't perform as well.
But just the little problem is that this is written in 2013, before all these innovations came to fruition. It's before the Tesla study.
Is that since China controls such a big amount of the market, we need another supplier to come in because countries are scared China's going to hold their
but our point is the market doesn't even matter if you don't need rare.
Yeah, like countries are smart. They know that China's risky, so they did their own things.
All right, we will run 10 seconds. Okay, is everybody ready? It's going to start on the climate change one. What?
Starting on the order?
Yeah.
Okay.
Start on the climate change weighing. We have both agreed that on magnitude, climate change is the biggest impact in the round. We think that even though we don't quantify our impact to climate change, we still win the round because any link to climate change is significantly more important than anything they can talk to you about China. Remember the analysis that I gave and Ethan gives, that is that every single year, because of emissions from fossil fuels, 140 times the amount of people die than the only past conflict in the South China Sea. The idea that that conflict would outweigh the risk of climate change is simply absurd. And that kind of thinking is why we're in this mess in the first place. They'll go to their China argument because they don't even win this in the first place. They say that like countries are flipping because they see the US as unreliable. And like not because of economic dependence. That like and they cite the Philippines leader. That's probably because the Philippines leader can't say I'm flipping because otherwise my economy will crash. They can't admit weakness. What we say is that the economic dependence means that A, the US can never form a successful coalition against China, but B, it means that China has no reason to fear such a coalition because they can always cripple it with like some economic moves. And go to our case. We have both agreed that drilling happens when you affirm. They say that this drilling is bad because it disturbs the seabed. Our evidence explicitly says that new technologies are decreasing this disturbance to the seabed. I don't know why they try to indict it. It says exactly that. They don't even implicate this because it just says, because they just say like some more methane will get released. We're the only ones that actually implicate this contention. Then they say that you don't actually need rare earth minerals. And the only actual scientific study in the round says you need rare earth minerals. And even if you don't, the alternatives are much more cost inefficient and don't perform as well. We have evidence from 2013, evidence from 2016 that all indicates this. The idea that in 2 years we could have achieved a technological revolution that means we no longer need this stuff is just a little bit ridiculous. We say that the reason why we need rare earth minerals is because countries will refuse to transition to green technology if they're dependent on China for these rare earth minerals. That means that without expansion of green technology, we tell you the world is going to warm by 10 degrees by continued reliance on fossil fuels. Even if we don't access an entire world change to green technology, we are still accessing significant impacts to global warming, which dramatically outweigh the few thousand deaths that they can give you in the South China Sea.
Alright, is everyone ready? Starting on this sort of climate change versus China overview.
Okay.
My opponent comes up and tells you that any impact of climate change is a worthwhile impact. That just simply doesn't make any sense. If they save one life, we say you shouldn't prioritize that. That's like coming up here and saying that our case solves a little bit of Trump getting a little bit less elected. No, we say that they actually have to provide some scope of their impact, otherwise there's literally no way to weigh this argument. Our argument is just simply so much more direct. We say that any degree of Chinese aggression is bad, and we give you the historical example that the last time China invaded one of these countries, even in only a 6-week conflict, it killed 50,000 people. Our argument is just much more direct and has a much more personal impact. Then, here's how we win that China will invade them. Right now, they drop our Yinghui evidence that says that the US is backing off the global stage, which is reducing tension, because the US presence is the root cause of Chinese aggression. When the US sees that when China sees that the US is amping up its aggression, just like has no expanding Grand Crossfire, it makes them become more aggressive. The one response my opponents respond is that China has some degree of economic coercion, but China already has economic coercion, has no expensive crossfire, no expensive summary. So does Russia. Russia has had economic leverage over every single country in Eastern Europe, but by affirming, it shows that economic coercion is not working. The Duterte example is very questioning, because Duterte is literally saying that the reason why he's on China's side is because he sees China as a more credible ally. But once the US joins, according to Corona, it signals that the US is now on their side, which makes the perception that allies flip. They drop our evidence that's really good from Chang and Holmes that says that this perception causes a rampant cycle of nationalism, which just like the invasion of Crimea, means that there is a greater risk of an invasion. Now, the second place that you can vote is on disturbing the ecosystem and releasing methane. Remember the Fizz News evidence that goes cold drop at no extent, which is that any disturbance of the deep seabed means dramatic harm to these species. Meaning, mining is any disturbance, meaning there will be a dramatic harm to these species, and this will release 90% of the methane that is locked onto the ocean floor. This does two things for us. Once, worse, it serves for external defense, because they don't tell you how much they solve for climate change. This is at least a granted harm to climate change. But two, it probably outweighs them on scope, because I would say that methane is much more potent, and the emission of tons of methane is a bigger impact to the climate change change than their small increase in renewable energy. But finally, they're not even going to win that any goes to renewable energy because of some important evidence. First, the Majianka evidence, which explains that that renewable energy alternatives are already cost effective. I encourage you to call for it because it very explicitly says that the decreasing prices has not been linked to rare earth metals. And the Richardson evidence says that they are cost effective in other ways, their evidence is outdated, and finally Teskey says we can go 100% green without needing the use of rare earth metals at all. Thank you.